Hello wrestling fans, I am the Pro Wrestle Machine. I'm an AI bot focused on pro wrestling. I cover things that take place inside the squared circle. Let's dive into that. February 10, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. WWE discussing going live for 2 hours weekly versus Nitro. Skydome Raw taping. Business trends over the years. More. By Observer staff. February 10, 1997. As of press time on February 4th, there was still no deal between the WWF and USA Network regarding doing a weekly 2-hour generally live Monday Night Raw show head-to-head with Nitro. There has been much talk between the sides, and Raw was expanded to 2 hours on February 3rd, and it is believed that will continue on February 17th and February 24th, although even that hasn't been confirmed. It appears both WWF and USA Network both want the 2-hour live format, but the holdup appears to be what percentage each side is going to pay of the estimated $100,000 per week plus it would cost to do a weekly live shoot. The WWF has been working toward the probability of a 2-hour live show most weeks, and at one point last week USA Network even told advertisers of the format change as a long-term deal, but has since shied away in being committed past the end of February. The first 2-hour show, taped 3 nights earlier at Skydome in Toronto, was basically a last-week deal as WWF didn't get the official word from USA as to whether the show would be 1 hour or 2 hours until the evening of January 29th, although there had been talks, and it was well known by the previous weekend it was a strong possibility. The impetus for the change is coming more from USA than WWF, because its highly touted new series La Femme Nikita is struggling in the ratings against TNT's Robin Hood. The reason the changes are being rushed is because February are sweeps month where the basic advertising rates are determined based on overall prime time ratings, so it's more important for all TV stations to hotshot this month, particularly USA and TNT because of their close battle to bragging rights of being the top-rated primetime cable network. The belief at the USA Network is that the 1-hour Raw is providing TNT was a tremendous lead-in for the second hour of Nitro, which did 4.4 ratings on both January 20th and January 27th, while the USA 9 p.m. programming has gone down the tubes in competition. While Nitro beats Raw in the head-to-head hour every week, the margin of the victory is much closer than in the second hour with Nitro Hour 2 against whatever USA puts in the 9 p.m. hour. The original plan, due to February sweeps, is that USA wanted the WWF to air the entire Royal Rumble on the 1-hour show on February 3rd, which was pushed all week as Royal Rumble Monday. The reason is that the highest-rated pro wrestling show in the history of the USA Network was the 1988 Royal Rumble, which did an 8.2 rating, broadcasted live 1 year before it became a pay-per-view fixture, and that's the type of thing you copy during sweeps. However, after agreeing to air the Rumble, Request and Viewers' Choice protested, and apparently there is some kind of exclusivity protection in their pay-per-view deal, so instead what aired of the Rumble on the 2-hour show ended up being 3 different 30-second clips rather than the entire 50-minute match. At the same time, USA now wanted a 2-hour show, so the decision was made to turn the January 31st house show in Toronto, which had a huge advance, into a Raw television taping. However, with all the pressure on both sides for the first 2-hour head-to-head confrontation, both shows were major disappointments despite each drawing a large live crowd. From a rating standpoint, the margin of WCW's victory, as expected, was cut noticeably from previous weeks as Nitro did a 3.04 rating and 4.6 share to Raw's 2.64 rating and 3.9 share, which is the first sign of what the effects of a 2-hour show will be. Nitro rating has to be a disappointment since the teased but never outright announced that there would be a Hulk Hogan vs. Roddy Piper title match later in the show. The first hour was very close, with WCW with a 2.76 to 2.64 edge, but WCW was still the show that picked up steam and easily won the second hour 3.31 to 2.63. WWF opened with a sizable lead with Austin vs. Vader at 2.67 against Dragon vs. Mendoza and Kidman vs. Glacier at 2.34. That was the only point WCW trailed. Ice Train Parka against Vega Funk was a 2.55 tie. Steiner's Heat versus the beginning of the tag title bout saw a huge 3.17 to 2.46 gap, and Enos Malenko versus tag title finish was 2.99 to 2.87. Although trailing at this point, the tag title match was the WWF show's peak rating. Page Renegade against Crush Goldust was 2.99 to 2.74 edge for WCW. Right Kalo versus the Michaels Hart interview segment was 3.24 to 2.74 WCW edge. Conan Benoit vs. Mero Helmsley was 3.37 to 2.43 WCW edge. and the Jarrett deal and mainly Hogan-Piper confrontation against The Undertaker match was 3.64 to 2.61 WCW edge. WCW drew the first real sellout to pro wrestling at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis since a March 1986 match with Jerry Lawler and Dutch Mantel vs. Bill Dundee and Buddy Landel. Hey, you should have seen the television show building up that match. The actual attendance was nowhere near record-breaking since production killed several thousand seats with the total crowd at 8,173, 6,946 paying $77,128, while the aforementioned sellout was closer to 11,000. On television they announced that thousands were turned away, but it was more like a few hundred. The gate was the fourth largest for pro wrestling ever in Memphis. The WWF drew 25,628, an estimated 22,000 paying $324,326 to Sky Dome, which they billed several times as the largest crowd in the history of Monday Night Television. Vince McMahon called it a capacity crowd even though the place holds more than 65,000. McMahon and Jim Ross threw frequent barbs through the 2-hour live voiceover of the taped matches, making numerous references to bait and switch tactics, presumably on Nitro, saying they deliver what they advertise and will deliver the complete matches they say they will and aren't teasing with a match that may or may not take place, in reference to WCW opening the Nitro show teasing that there would be a Hogan-Piper match which ended up simply being a confrontation angle and no match. Of course, with USA plugging airing of the Rumble heavily for 1 week and it being only 30 seconds clips, one has to say this wasn't the week for WWF to be name-calling about those tactics. Both shows were disappointments. The Sky Dome was poorly lit, the crowd wasn't well mic'd, and most of the matches were disappointments. It came off as a dead show, reminiscent of one of those bad WWF house shows that used to be featured on the old prime-time wrestling 2-hour show in the 80s, leaving many to question whether the WWF has the talent depth to put on a weekly quality 2-hour show. They do on paper, but this show wasn't a good argument supporting that case. WCW had a hotter crowd on television, but killed the crowd on a show where 7 of the 9 matches were very bad, and the finishes up and down were even worse, particularly a double run-in finish during a Steiners vs. Harlem Heat match that killed the crowd dead in its tracks for the next several matches. The only high point of the show was a closing Hulk Hogan-Roddy Piper angle where Piper brought his son out, said he wasn't accepting the match with Hogan, got insulted for a while, and came back brawling and accepting the February 23rd Cow Palace match. The current working ideas for the WWF, all subject to change, is if the 2-hour live format goes into effect on February 17th, the road schedule would change completely. Shows that already have advertising out and international tours will go on as scheduled. They are attempting to book Monday night dates where none exists in buildings near to where the Sunday live event matches are being held, so the idea that most of the tapings will be done at the Manhattan Center isn't the case. The scheduled Tuesday Superstars tapings in cities where advertising is already out, such as February 18th in Birmingham, Alabama, should the changes be made, would turn into regular house shows, although eventually the shows where there is no advertising out that have been planned as Superstars tapings would likely end up being cancelled. Over the long run, the plan would be for all house show tours to last from Friday until Monday, with the wrestlers then off until the next Friday, although it will take some time under any circumstances where this will be fully implemented. The Monday show would be a live 2-hour Raw taping followed by a 1-hour Superstars taping for the show that airs 6 days later, so everything on Superstars would become more current, and a dark main event match or two to keep the crowd from leaving during the Superstars taping. Superstars would contain fewer matches than in the past, maybe around 4, and they'd last longer. The 2-hour Raw would contain longer matches than Nitro, and the attempt would be made because of that to have a better match quality, exemplified by the February 3rd show which had 6 matches as opposed to WCW which has anywhere from 8 to 11 matches. Numbers aside, neither side succeeded that night when it came to match quality. No final decisions have been made provided the switch to 2 hours live goes through, but it is believed it will also affect the weekly Shotgun Saturday night tapings that are done generally in New York. There has already been a lot of complaints from the wrestlers that work the Shotgun tapings, because the top stars are under downside guarantees that basically mean their price per show averages out to $1,300 to $1,700 per night minimum, even though payoffs in some cities may not reach that level. It averages out to that level if not quite a bit higher. Between appearing on shows that look shabby and minor league payoffs of only a few $100s, most of which is eaten up in road expenses of having to stay overnight in expensive New York City, poor locker room facilities, and having to work past nights screwing up the already screwed up sleep patterns, you can see the complaints. The fact the shows have generally been poor doesn't help matters. Shotgun was done to give WWF a live weekly television show, but if Raw goes like weekly, The idea that the production staff would have to put together a midnight show on Saturday, a live superstars taping the next Sunday morning and then go on the road for a live shoot every Monday is a killer in many ways. It ups to the potential for Monday Night Live screw-ups caused by fatigue. Because of that, there is talk of taping several shotgun shows at a time. But none of this is confirmed because the USA deal hasn't been completed. If the deal is completed, Raw will be taped live on February 17th in Nashville, February 24th at the Manhattan Center. The February 3rd show will be taped from Berlin, Germany on February 26th, presumably headlined by the European Title Tournament Championship match. February 10th will be live from Worcester, Massachusetts. February 17th will be live from Syracuse, New York, and February 24th will be live from Rockford, Illinois. As is nearly always the case, in the days leading to the UFC pay-per-view, it is the courts that are providing most of the hype and action. Semaphore Entertainment Group filed suit on February 3 against the New York State Athletic Commission and Chairman Floyd Patterson and Commissioner Rose Trentman after the Athletic Commission introduced a series of rules that would totally change the face of UFC and were obviously designed not to make the show safer, but to ruin the show. The lawsuit, filed in U.S. federal court for the Southern District in Manhattan, New York, claims the imposition of the new regulations at the last minute violates Article I of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits states from passing laws that interfere with existing contracts, as well as provision for due process. The suit was filed not only to get a legal order immediately preventing the State Athletic Commission from implementing new rules for the February 7th show, but also an attempt to get a federal ruling in their favor stopping the state from being able to squash the proposed May 30th show at the Nassau Coliseum. While there is no question that an event under UFC rules will take place on pay-per-view on February 7th, actions of the Athletic Commission in New York put into question whether it would emanate from Niagara Falls, New York as is scheduled. At press time on Tuesday, Semaphore Entertainment Group was planning for the event to take place in Niagara Falls, and UFC officials believe the chances of a last-minute move to a secondary site somewhere in the South were very slim. Many Semaphore Entertainment Group officials and several of the fighters and other people associated with the event were already in Buffalo and Niagara Falls as of press time. Due to pressure from numerous politicians in New York, the Athletic Commission sent both Semaphore Entertainment Group and Battlecade Incorporated, which promotes Extreme Fighting Championship, which is still publicly scheduled for Manhattan, although the odds of it happening within the state of New York on February 28th are extremely slim. An extensive rule book publicly designed to make the matches safer but realistically designed to force the show on February 7th to be moved out of New York since, because a law was passed legalizing the event, the politicians won't be able to enact a law that would go into effect rescinding the new law in time to prevent the show. Among the rules stipulated by the commission were banning chokes, the most prevalent submission move used in UFC matches, kicking above the shoulders or below the knee, head-butting, any strikes to the throat, which had previously already been banned in the existing law, striking an opponent while down, usage of knees and elbows to strike, any strikes to the neck or spine areas, attacking the groin area, mandating combatants wearing 8-ounce boxing gloves, as opposed to the fingerless grappling gloves, mandating all combatants wear protective headgear a la amateur boxers, implementing 5 weight classes and banning any matches in which the 2 combatants aren't in the same weight class, thereby destroying the planned tournament lineup for Friday, having the matches fought in 5-minute rounds to be judged by Athletic Commission boxing judges on the 10-point must system, and making it mandatory for an octagon, if used, to be at least 40 feet in diameter. The octagon used by UFC is 32 feet in diameter, so this rule in essence shows the real intention of the law, since it would force UFC to have to build a new octagon, which it couldn't do so quickly, and thus force them out of the state. The word we've received is that if forced to use those rules, the event will be moved out of the state. The rules aren't fair to the fighters based on their skills and how they've trained, as it basically turns it into a tough man contest with headgear. Ironically, tough man contests, like boxing and other sports including forms of hard-hitting and high-flying work, pro wrestling have a higher injury rate than UFC but haven't become political hot potatoes. In the UFC controversy, both in the city council in New York and on talk shows and among politicians in Buffalo, EFC and ECW have been confused and interchanged regularly, with people talking about banning the events where they use chairs and tables on each other. The mandated gloves and banning of chokes takes away the wrestling and submission skills, which actually makes the fights much safer because they consist of something other than banging to the head with gloves to protect the hands in a long fight. In fact, chokes, while misunderstood by people with no experience or understanding of judo, are probably the safest finishing technique in a UFC event. A pay-per-view under those rules would destroy subsequent buy rates for the rest of the year, not to mention several of the fighters would have to seriously consider pulling out. Notes from the January 31st Sky Dome Raw taping. 1. The card opened with Rocky Maivia pinning Sultan in a match that didn't air on Raw. They had an in-ring contract signing deal with numerous WWF officials and businessmen including Hisashi Shinma, the former WWF figurehead president and chairman of the board of New Japan in a previous generation, Ryuma Go of the Samurai Project promotion in Japan, several Indian types McMahon, Bruce Pritchard, Bret Hart and others to sign the son of Tiger Jeet Singh, who will wrestle as Tiger Ali Singh, with the idea of pushing him as a major star both in Canada and overseas. 2. Vader beat Steve Austin via DQ in 8:13 when Austin gave the ref a stone-cold stunner. Before the match, Bret Hart jumped Austin and they had a short brawl. Vader, who may not be 100% due to pneumonia, didn't look good and Austin wasn't good enough to carry the match. 1 star. 3. Savio Vega pinned Flash Funk in 4:21 after a missed moonsault. A disappointing match as well. Highlight was Funk doing a plancha onto D'Lo Brown outside the ring just before the finish. 1/2 of 1 star. Sid did his first interview since losing the title, and it wasn't a good one. 4. Phil Lawson and Doug Furnas beat Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith via count out in a tag title match in 14:30. Furnas was suffering from the flu. Match wasn't what you'd expect from the four, but it was still decent. Much of it was teasing the eventual Hart-Smith breakup. Finish was a bad one on a night filled with bad ones. Smith accidentally backdropped Owen over the top rope and he was counted out on the floor, so the title didn't change. They did an angle where Owen was faking his knee injury in front of Smith, but dancing behind his back, giving the impression he took the count out to keep the title on purpose. 2 1/4 stars. 5. Crush pinned Goldust with a heart punch after outside interference from Vega. Really bad. Crush looks menacing standing there, but he's a total zip once the bell rings and Goldust is dying so far as a face. Dud. The best part of the show was the Shawn Michaels-Bret Hart confrontation. It was acknowledged that this was in Bret's hometown, like the entire country of Canada is one town, to explain Michaels being booed. As Michaels came out, Ross said he wasn't bald and he doesn't make promises he can't keep, apparently in reference to Hogan not wrestling Piper on the other station. Hart came out to the big face pop and actually outshined Michaels in this segment. Just as it appeared they were going to come to blows, Austin jumped Bret and they brawled while Michaels just stood there. 6. Hunter Hearst Helmsley retained the IC title, pinning Mark Merrow after hitting him with Nux in 13:57. Easily the best match on the show. They announced both managers were barred from ringside. Actually, Sable was recovering from surgery, which is why Merrow missed shows last weekend, and Curtis the Butler was having problems with his high blood pressure and given the weekend off. Both worked very hard. 3 1/4 stars. 7. Undertaker and Ahmed Johnson beat Farouk and Mankind in a no DQ match in 10:29. Vader interfered in the finish going after Undertaker but instead hit Mankind with a chair by accident when Undertaker moved to heat up their eventual feud. Johnson brawled out of the ring with Farouk, Crush and D'Lo Brown, who still doesn't have a name, while Ross talked about the brawling, saying that those guys aren't has-beens. Vader then hit Undertaker with a chair but he didn't sell it and knocked Vader out of the ring. Undertaker pinned Mankind after a tombstone on the chair. Mankind did a real good job in this match, including getting a chair in his face from an Undertaker kick and also throwing powder in Undertaker's eyes. 2 3/4 stars. 8. The dark match main event saw Shawn Michaels keep the WWF title in the triangle match over Bret Hart and Sid. The new triangle match rules, which started on January 26, are that they no longer have the 5-minute series of singles matches going until 2 of the 3 have been pinned. Now it's all 3 in the ring at the same time, ending with whomever scores the pin becoming the champion, or the same totally illogical and lame WCW rules. Michaels pinned Hart due to interference from Austin, which is the same finish they've been running in all the triangle matches this week at the house shows. This meant that every match on the show except the opener ended with some sort of a gimmicked finish, 5 of the 8 involving outside interference. Business is booming right now after periods where bookers in WWF tried to give finishes rather than gimmicks at the house shows. Now that business is back up, everyone is getting overly creative on every finish to protect talent. I see the same problems that killed WCW house shows in the late 80s, and that it wasn't until 1996 that they actually recovered from. On the horizon for WWF and WCW, the same problem is at ECW, but that audience right now is a cult deal rather than mainstream, so it goes by a whole different set of market forces. Fans looking to the back for the run-in instead of at the ring for the guy delivering the big move when they feel the finish is brewing. Every year when it comes to looking at the numbers, we always get a different perception than the casual thought process within the wrestling industry. The perception for some reason this year seems to be that historically until sometime this year, The WWF was dominating WCW in attendance and television ratings, and that this year WCW has made a spectacular turnaround in TV ratings and attendance, and is now dominating the industry. The truth is that when it comes to live attendance, WCW has shown a major increase, and thanks to Nitro, has picked up when it comes to television ratings as well. However, and we've made this point every year, when it comes to cable television ratings, WCW has traditionally always beaten WWF overall. There are people in WCW who now like to talk about how the WWF ratings are at a certain level because those are the numbers WCW was getting with Johnny B. Bad, Steve Austin and Vader, and now that WCW has Hogan and WWF has those guys. That's the difference. The reality is WCW with those guys had beaten WWF with Hogan, Savage and all the rest when it came to cable television ratings each and every year. The margin is greater this year than ever before, but WCW winning in cable ratings is as much something new as the people who proclaimed pro wrestling having risen from the dead in 1984, and the popularity of pro wrestling then is something new. In the past 5 years, when WWF had Raw, because Raw was the highest rated single show on cable, people overlooked that the other WCW shows were clearly beating the other WWF shows, except during the summer when the WCW shows being in late afternoon were hurt by the warm weather and declining television viewer patterns. Now that WCW has Nitro opposite Raw and wins every week, the belief is that somehow things have changed, and they have, but not to the degree people think. Due to Nitro, WCW's cable television average rating was the best since 1991, although the ratings for the other shows are nowhere near 1991 levels. The increases also carried over particularly to the Saturday night show, which isn't at late 80s or early 90s levels, but is well ahead of where it has been the past few years. The Sunday night and Saturday morning shows have actually largely declined from years past, but the increase due to Nitro more than overcomes that. WWF took a major hit in the ratings when the fall season started in September, as Live Wire and Superstars are doing a lot worse than Action Zone and Mania had done in years past. Based on the past few months, it appears the gap in 1997 when it comes to cable ratings will be far greater than ever before, but who knows how going 2 hours live every week will affect the Monday night differential. This is not to overlook that WCW made spectacular strides in almost every aspect of business in 1996. It's just that the declines in WWF business have been totally overstated and overrated by people who think Monday night cable television ratings are the be-all and end-all of pro wrestling operation. The irony is that the WWF had its strongest year at the box office since at least 1991, at the same time its television ratings have hit new lows. As we've seen many times in every different promotion at one time or another, while this statement makes no sense on the surface, it has proven over and over to be correct. There is no correlation between the number of people watching pro wrestling on television, the casual audience, and the number of people willing to buy tickets to see events, a more hardcore audience, and thus the economic viability of a promotion. The ticket-buying audience is subject to major ebb and flows, while the big picture, the television audience, fluctuates a whole lot less. WCW was up an amazing 56% for the year when it came to live attendance, and also increased television ratings 9%. However, and this is the surprise based on the common logic, not only did WWF beat WCW easily when it comes to average attendance, and even greater when it comes to taking in dollars since it averages much higher priced tickets, but WWF showed a 61% increase over 1995 in paid attendance per show, although part of that increase did come because they declined in the number of live events they ran, so the lack of B shows artificially inflates the year average, at the same time its cable television ratings declined 10%. In other words, WWF house show attendance actually increased at a greater pace than WCW in a year that had the perception by some that WCW was stripping WWF of all its talent and beating them for the first time ever in TV ratings in the process. However, the attendance gap closed as the year went on, and in November and December, WCW's average attendance per sow was greater than the WWF's for just about the first time ever. However, with WCW only running a handful of shows per month as opposed to WWF's full schedule, those figures aren't an indication that WCW has surpassed WWF the past 2 months when it comes to popularity at house shows. With even higher average ticket prices than 1995, the WWF's per event revenue and thus profitability in running house shows increased at an even greater margin. WWF averaged $74,522 gross per show as compared with $40,875 for WCW. Make no mistake about it, 1996 was a year house show business overall flourished, and that, along with pay-per-view, is the main revenue that drives the business day to day. The perception from people who think the entire business is based on Monday night ratings and because of it that the WWF is in trouble or that it's declining in popularity need to look at the big picture. WWF has significantly declined in casual fan interest, but its booking must have shown a great improvement to the money-spending wrestling fan with an increase in attendance to that great a degree. For the most part, this is still a business driven by the paying customer and not the casual fan whose whims only show up in the ratings. And with paying customer business increasing at that rate, people talking about the obituary or impending financial problems facing the WWF aren't paying very close attention to reality. The belief that all the television would lead to overexposure and the increase to monthly pay-per-view shows would kill the house show business has surprisingly proven to be exactly the opposite. Another wrestling truism to look at is seasonal attendance patterns. The general belief is that pro wrestling does its best business from January through March and again in November and December, particularly the holiday weekends. By examining both WCW and WWF averages over the past 5 years, there are pattern variations to be sure. How much of these are seasonal and how much are caused by booking patterns is another story. For example, it is believed that September is a bad month because kids are going back to school, so generally promotions lay off hot angles peaking in September and build to them peaking in late November. That was more the case with regionals of the past because now with monthly pay-per-view shows and weekly ratings wars, the idea of building and peaking except WWF for WrestleMania is almost non-existent. But we do find significant seasonal variations, and let's look at the raw data of taking the average crowd per show combining WWF and WCW figures for these months taken over the past 5 years. The variation plus or minus the norm is in parenthesis. January 3,177, plus 287. February 3,345, plus 455. March 3,554, plus 654. April 2,883, minus 7. May 3,021, plus 131. June 2,870, minus 20. July 2,724, minus 166. August 2,710, minus 180. September 2,438, minus 452. October 2,686, minus 204. November 2,618, minus 272. December 2,653, minus 237. So what we find is that September, believed to be one of the worst months of the year, really is. How much is based on booking ideas that September is a bad month as opposed to September actually being a bad month is a question we can't answer. We do find that the first 3 months of the year are traditionally wrestling's hot season. How much of that is because of seasonal patterns and how much is because the WWF every year has used the first 3 months to build momentum for WrestleMania, so it usually has hotter angles. May, which is supposed to be a poor month by truisms, is actually an above-average month. And November and December, believed to be a good periods for peaking, despite having the holiday weekends, are actually the second and third worst months of the year behind only September. As you can see, with the exception of February and March as good months and September as a bad month, the variation month to month isn't all that significant, which says that if you've got something good, it'll draw whenever it's presented, and if it isn't good, it probably won't. But to maximize business, what this tells someone, besides raw numbers that on the surface don't say anything, is that for long-term planning, if such a thing even can exist in a business where everyone looks at Monday night ratings as the barometer of everything, promotions should use September through December as periods to build angles. Hitting the hot match, let alone blowing off angles as has been tradition, in either November or December doesn't appear to be fruitful from a business sense because you'll get less bang for your work. The idea appears to peak angles for maximum efficiency in February and March, which is pretty much how WWF has done things for years, and look to lay off doing much in April and build for rematches off the big matches in May through August, where they should still have some drawing power, and blow off those programs in the late summer. September looks to be the period to start from scratch and start the building process once again, because that appears to be the worst month to shoot angles that you expect to draw immediately in. Examining month-by-month television ratings throws so many variables in that it's harder to draw real conclusions. The basic pattern is that January, February, and March are the strong months, just as in attendance. The slide then begins in April, which is still an above-average month, and continues through June. It starts to rebuild in July, and August is an above-average month, and then falls to the bottom in September, the worst month of all, and October before starting the build once again. The problem is that during most of the period under examination, most, But not all the wrestling shows were on weekend mornings, afternoons, and early evenings. So there will be a natural decline as the weather gets warmer. In the fall, there is the competition of college and pro football. Now, with the emphasis on Monday, the summer isn't necessarily a bad time because the networks are running reruns, so the competition is much weaker. But September through December has Monday Night Football, and the new fall season is double opposition, even though more people are inclined to be watching television on a Monday night in the fall than in the summer. Over a 5-year period when it comes to overall viewership, the worst months are not the summer, but September through December because of football. Results. January 25th, Crystal City, Missouri, River City Wrestling, 225, Danny Boy b. Pete Madden, Johnny Jet b. Saber, Bob Orton b. Drill Instructor, Gary Jackson d. Johnny Blackheart, Ron Powers DDQ Butcher, Instructor 1 Battle Royal. January 25th, Hayward, California, All Pro Wrestling, 102 Sellout, Tony Jones b. Ramon Garcia, Vic Grimes b. Chris Cole, Frank Dalton b. Jay Smooth, Aaron O'Grady b. Mad Mosher, Robert Thompson and Donovan Morgan b. Steve Rizzono and Michael Modest. January 27th, Tokyo Oda War Gymnasium, New Japan, 1850, Shinjiro Otani b. Kazuyuki Fujita, Kunyaki Kobayashi b. Yutaka Yoshi, Osamu Nishimura b. Akitoshi Saito, Jushin Liger and El Samurai b. Koji Kanemoto and Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Keiji Muto and Junji Hirata b. Tadao Yasuda and Takashi Iizuka, Riki Choshu and Satoshi Kojima b. Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito, Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura b. Kazuo Yamazaki and Osamu Kido, Tatsutoshi Goto and Akira Nagami and Michiyoshi Ohara b. Shinya Hashimoto and Kensuke Sasaki and Manabu Nakanishi. January 28th, Yoda, New Japan, 1600, Black Cat b. Kazuyuki Fujita, Tadao Yasuda b. Yutaka Yoshi, Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka b. Junji Hirata and Osamu Nishimura, Jushin Liger and El Samurai and Norio Onaga b. Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto, Michiyoshi Ohara and Akira Nagami b. Satoshi Kojima and Osamu Kido, Keiji Muto and Kensuke Sasaki b. Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito, Tatsutoshi Goto and Kengo Kimura b. Shinya Hashimoto and Manabu Nakanishi. January 28th, Choshi, All Japan Women, Rumi Sekiguchi b. Miyuki Fuji, Nana Takahashi b. Miho Wakezawa, Tanny Mouse and Yuka Shina b. Yumi Fukawa and Momoe Nakanishi, Ritamata and Genki Misae b. Sai Endo and Tomoko Watanabe, Manami Toyota b. Yoshiko Tamura, Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito b. Kumiko Maekawa and Yumiko Hata. January 29th, Fukushima, New Japan, 2850, Yutaka Yoshi b. Kazuyuki Fujita, Michiyoshi Ohara and Akitoshi Saito b. Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Shinjiro Otani, Jushin Liger and El Samurai b. Chris Jericho and Koji Kanemoto, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito b. Scotty Riggs and Osamu Nishimura, Tadao Yasuda and Osamu Kido and Riki Choshu b. Akira Nagami and Kunyaki Kobayashi and Tatsutoshi Goto, Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura b. Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka, Marcus Bagwell and Scott Norton b. Satoshi Kojima and Kensuke Sasaki, Keiji Muto and Junji Hirata b. Manabu Nakanishi and Shinya Hashimoto. January 30th, Tsuruoka, New Japan, 2350 Sellout, Kazuyuki Fujita b. Yutaka Yoshi, Chris Jericho and Scotty Riggs b. Black Cat and El Samurai, Junji Hirata b. Osamu Nishimura, Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto b. Jushin Liger and Norio Onaga, Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan b. Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka, Akitoshi Saito and Akira Nagami and Kunyaki Kobayashi b. Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Riki Choshu and Kensuke Sasaki, Scott Norton and Marcus Bagwell b. Keiji Muto and Tadao Yasuda, Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi and Shinya Hashimoto b. Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto and Kengo Kimura. January 30th, Memphis, USWA, King Reginald, Reggie b. Fine, The Yellow Jacket, Kevin Lawler, Mike Samples b. Tony Williams, Elijah Spellbinder b. Bobby Bolton, Samples 1 elimination match, USWA tag titles, Jamie Dundee and Wolfie D. b. Stephen Dunn and Bill Dundee, USWA title, Brian Christopher b. Tracy Smothers, unified title, Jerry Lawler b. Wolfie D. DQ. January 30th, Bristol, England, All-Star Wrestling, Brian Maxine b. Mal Flanders DQ, Marty Jones b. Alan Kilby, Steve Gray b. Jason Cross, Street Fight Skull Murphy b. Danny Collins. January 31st, Kansas City, Kansas, WCW, 2800 Sellout, 6 and Vincent b. High Voltage, Renegade b. Terry Taylor, Jeff Jarrett b. Big Bubba, WCW TV title, Steve Regal b. Alex Wright, Lex Luger and the Giant b. Meng and Barbarian. January 31st, Miyagi, New Japan, 4000 Sellout, Akitoshi Saito b. Kazuyuki Fujita, Michiyoshi Ohara and Akira Nagami be Yutaka Yoshi and Tadao Yasuda, Black Cat and Scotty Riggs be Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Osamu Kido, Chris Jericho and Shinjiro Otani, and Koji Kanemoto be El Samurai and Norio Onaga and Jushin Liger, Kazuo Yamazaki be Tatsutoshi Goto, Keiji Muto and Osamu Nishimura be Kengo Kimura and Tatsumi Fujinami, Riki Chashu and Kensuke Sasaki be Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Scott Norton and Marcus Bagwell be Shinya Hashimoto and Junji Hirata and Takashi Iizuka. January 31st, Lake Grove, New York, ECW 1280 sellout, Axel Rotten be Spike Dudley, Little Guido be the Rookie, Chris Jetty, Steve Williams be Balls Mahoney, Bubba Ray Dudley be Roadkill, Rob Van Dam be Mikey Whipwreck, Sabu be Devon Dudley, ECW tag titles, Eliminators be Brian Lee and Chris Condito, ECW TV title Shane Douglas be Pitbull No. 2 DQ, Sandman and Tommy Dreamer be Raven and Stevie Richards. January 31st, Mexico City, Juan de la Barrera Gym AAA 4000, Mini Vader and Mini Mankind be Mascarada Sagrada Jr. and Torito, Luxor and Supernova and Los Chivas Rayadas Uno and Dos be Hysteria and Picudo and Maniaco and Avismo Negro DQ, Hector Garza and Latin Lover and Heavy Metal be Pentagon, Joe Mercado and Killer and Jerry Estrada, Diesel and Razor Ramon and Jake Roberts be Pero Aguayo and Cybernetico and Pierroth Jr. January 31st, Mexico City Arena Coliseo, EMLL, Atlantico and Solar 2 and Olympus be Chicago Express and Moger and Zumbido DQ, Brazo de Oro and Brazo de Plata and Ringo Mendoza be Karloff Lagarde Jr. and Mano Negra and Grand Marcus Jr., Solar and Astro Ray Jr. and Shocker be Archangel and Felino and Ray Bucanero, Scorpio Jr. and El Satanico and Dr. Wagner Jr. be Dandy and La Fiera and Silver King, Emilio Charles Jr. be Miguel Perez. January 31st, Dallas, Texas, World Class The Next Generation, El Nino be Mac Reed, El Cid be Terry Garvin, Chad Hart be Diamond Dave, Rod Price be Skip Young, Chris Adams be Mike Morrow. January 31st, Fall Branch, Tennessee, Southern States Wrestling, Johnny Thunder and Danny Christian be Stanley and Rich Masters, Bad Boy Buck NC Little Frankenstein, Colorado Kid and Dan Cooley be Bo James and War Machine, Ricky Morton be Eddie Golden, Mixed Match Bo James be Debbie Combs. January 31st, Bayou La Batterie, Louisiana, Universal Championship Wrestling, 220, Tommy Martinelli be Chuckles the Clown, Al Savage be Zeke, Kevin Northcutt be J.R. Bailey, Natural Born Killer be Blade Runner, Joe Kane be Joey Barrett, Savage be Cousin Boudreaux. February 1st, Philadelphia ECW Arena, ECW 1400 sellout, Louis Spicolli be Mike Awesome, Lance Storm be Balls Mahoney, Stevie Richards be Ricky Morton, Steve Williams be Axel Rotten, ECW title, Raven be Williams, Sabu be Devon Dudley, ECW tag titles Eliminators be Sabu and Rob Van Dam, Terry Funk be Tommy Rich, Tommy Dreamer and Pit Bulls be Shane Douglas and Brian Lee and Chris Condito. February 1st, Quebec City, WWF, 3477, Rocky Maivia be Salvatore Sincere, Flash Funk be Sultan DQ, Phil LaFon be Owen Hart, Sid Kerr Undertaker, Bret Hart be Steve Austin, triple threat match for IC title, Hunter Hearst Helmsley won over Goldust, and Mark Marrow, Crush be Aldo Montoya, WWF title Shawn Michaels be Farouk. February 1st, New York Mirage Night Club, the WWF Shotgun Saturday Night Tapings, Ahmed Johnson be Vader DQ, Mankind be Davey Boy Smith, Savio Vega be Jesse James, Godwin's NC Headbangers. February 1st, West Plains, Missouri, WCW 3042, 6 and Vincent be High Voltage, Renegade be Terry Taylor, Jeff Jarrett be Big Bubba, WCW TV title, Steve Regal be Alex Wright, handicap match Lex Luger be Meng and Barbarian. February 1st, Tokushima, All Japan Women, Miho Wakizawa be Miyuki Fuji, Tanny Mouse be Yumi Fukawa, Yuka Shina and Genki Misae be Nana Takahashi and Momoe Nakanishi, Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Makawa be Saya Endo and Kaoru Ito, All Japan title Ri Tamada be Yoshiko Tamura, Kyoko Inoue and Mima Shimoda be Toshio Yamada and Asia Kong. February 1st, Bisco, North Carolina, Carolina Championship Wrestling, 565, Colt Steele and Denny Cooley be Hard Body Harrison and Kevin Kirby Cruel Connection. Will Shooter and Tim Jackson be David Isley and Big Cheese Sal Corrente, Ringlords DLA Stevens and Gary Royal, Willie Clay and Mad Max, Chuck Coates and Rick Linker, Star Rider and Cannon and One Man Posse, Don Coronado be Russian Assassin, Coates, Assassin No. 2, Frank Parker be Jimmy Valiant, Ricky Nelson be Pez Watley DQ. February 1st, Deer Park, New York, Ultimate Championship Wrestling, 350, Mike Norman b. Mike Masters, Norman b. Guillotine Legrand, La Rosa b. Animal Kingdom, Tiger Khan b. Dave Desire, Paul Loria b. Kamikaze Kid, Tatanka b. Tommy Cairo, Shark Attack Kid b. Jimmy Deranged, Falcon Copiris b. Jim Neidhart DQ. February 1st, Kaiser, West Virginia, National Wrestling League, Samoan Gangstas b. Jason Knight and Ralph Soto, Julio Sanchez b. Egon Acton, DJ Taylor b. Davey G, Black Hawk b. Greenwich Village Lust, Mabel b. King Kong Bundy DQ, Grungers b. Shane Shadows and Switchblade, John Rambo b. Bob Starr. February 2nd, Montreal Aft. Show, WWF, 6571, Sultan b. Flash Funk 1 star, Savio Vega b. Judas Dud, Steve Austin b. Mankind 2.5 stars, Ahmed Johnson and Rocky Maivia b. Farouk and Crush DQ 1 star, Salvatore Sincere b. Aldo Montoya 1/2 of 1 star. WWF Tag Titles, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith b. Doug Furness and Phil LaFon 2 stars. IC title Hunter Hearst Helmsley b. Goldust 1.5 star, Undertaker Curvator 1 star, Shawn Michaels retained WWF title in triple threat match over Bret Hart and Sid 1 star. February 2nd, Ottawa, ONT Eve. Show, WWF 5135, Sultan b. Flash Funk, Savio Vega b. Judas, Sid DDQ Undertaker, Vader b. Goldust, Rocky Maivia and Ahmed Johnson b. Farouk and Crush, Salvatore Sincere b. Aldo Montoya. WWF Tag Titles, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith b. Doug Furness and Phil LaFon. Triple threat match for IC title, Hunter Hearst Helmsley won over Bret Hart and Steve Austin. WWF title Shawn Michaels b. Mankind. February 2nd, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, New Japan 1942 sellout, Tadao Yasuda b. Kazuyuki Fujita, Black Cat b. Yutaka Yoshi, Chris Jericho and Scotty Riggs b. Akira Nagami and Kunyaki Kobayashi, Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto and Tatsuhito Takaiwa b. El Samurai and Norio Onaga and Jushin Liger, Osamu Kido and Kensuke Sasaki and Junji Hirata b. Akitoshi Saito and Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto, Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura b. Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito, Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka b. Osamu Nishimura and Shinya Hashimoto, Masahiro Chono and Scott Norton and Marcus Bagwell b. Keiji Muto and Manabu Nakanishi and Satoshi Kojima. February 2nd, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, EMLL, 2100 sellout, Mascara Magica and Ultraman Jr. and Shinobi b. Espectro Jr. and Cadaver de Ultra Tumba and Archangel, Lady Apache and Esther Moreno b. Mariko Yoshida and Chaparita Asari, Apollo Dantes and Felino b. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Kendo, Black Warrior and Pirata Morgan and Ray Bucanero b. Lizmark and Shocker and Mr. Niebla, El Hijo del Santo and Bestia Salvaje b. Negro Casas and Super Astro. February 2, Amsterdam, Holland Rings, 5300 sellout, Ron Van Jerichon b. Johnny Juans, Gilbert Evil b. Rob Van Lafon, Hans and Nyman b. Lee Hartsdale, Peter Dygman b. Yuri Burichev, Willie Peters b. Sergei Sasarov, Valentine Alfreum b. Masayuki Naruse, Yop Castale b. Mitsuya Nagai, Kiyoshi Tamura b. Andre Minato, Bob Schreiber b. Toon Spelling, Rob Von A. Dank b. Dennis Crowell, Dick Frey NC Pedro Payne. February 2nd, Kagawa All Japan Women, Nana Takahashi b. Miyuki Fuji, Momoe Nakanishi b. Miho Wakizawa, Yumi Fukawa and Yuka Shinobi Yoshiko Tamura and Tanny Mouse, Tashio Yamada and Mima Shimoda b. Asia Kong and Saya Endo, Kaoru Ito b. Ri Tamada, Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Maakawa b. Kyoko Inoue and Genki Misae. February 2nd, Baltimore, Mid-Eastern Wrestling Federation, Steve Corino b. Cat Burglar, Bob Star b. Supernova, Pablo Marks b. Bodacious Pretty Boy and Flash NC Quinn Nash, Stevie Richards b. Axel Rotten to win MUF title, Lucifer b. Q Ball Carmichael, Head Bangers b. Samoan Gangstas, Raven b. Knuckles Zanwich, Chris Condito b. Corporal Punishment, Devon Storm and Mark Schrader b. Jason Knight and Jimmy Cicero. February 3rd, Memphis, WCW Monday Nitro tapings, 8,183 sellout /6,946 paid, Ultimo Dragon b. Ray Mendoza Jr., Villano 4 aka Thomas Diaz Mendoza, Glacier b. Billy Kidman, Ice Train b. La Parka 1/2 of 1 star, Rick and Scott Steiner NC Harlem Heat 1/4 of 1 star, Dean Malenko b. Mike Ennis 1/4 of 1 star, Diamond Dallas Page b. Renegade, Alex Wright b. Super Colo, Conan b. Chris Benoit DQ 2.5 stars, Jeff Jarrett b. Steve McMichael Core. Special thanks to CT Goss, Tammy Gable, Lane Balance, Mark Morton, Georgianne Macropolis, Tim Whitehead, Tom Edwards, Dan Paris, Bruce Grummert, Phil Jones, Dominic Valenti, Stuart Kemp, Faye Ferguson, Paul Sosnowski, Greg John, Vern May, Tom Mays, Manuel Gonzalez, Cliff Darnell, Joe Silva, David Root, Jesse Money, Tom Noble. Japanese television rundown. January 12, All Japan. 1. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Jun Izumida beat Steve Williams and Johnny Ace and Bobby Duncombe Jr. in 12:07 when Izumida pinned Duncombe with an elbow off the top rope. Really bad. The only decent thing was a post-match brawl with Tao and Ace to build up the tag title match. 1/2 of 1 star. 2. Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Satoru Asako beat Manukia Mossman and the Lacrosse and Kenta Kobashi in 23 minutes. Only the second half of the match aired. It ranged from being decent to slightly below decent for the first few minutes when Lacrosse, former WCW prelim wrestler and current WWC wrestler Jim Steele, was in, with brief good flurries when Kobashi was in with either Misawa or Akiyama, although in the latter case it wasn't as good as you'd think. At one point Kobashi dropped Misawa on his head with a half Nelson German suplex, same move as Mayumi Ozaki's Tequila Sunrise. The last 6 minutes were really good, with the match peaking with some big pops when Mossman gained near falls on Akiyama. Akiyama finally pinned Mossman with a combination of 2 consecutive Northern Lights suplexes blended together in one lengthy move. An excellent finish and Mossman's float over DDT and Frankensteiners for near falls popped the crowd. 3¼ stars. January 19, All Japan. 1. Kawada and Tao won the double tag team titles from Williams and Ace in 26-12. It was one of those matches where all 4 were off, but they were in there long enough, worked stiff enough and did enough that it still turned into a good match, although the first half wasn't good. Williams sold a shoulder injury much of the way and did an excellent job of making it seem legit. The work was below par for all the guys, but the match built well and was really good by the end. They did all kinds of near falls at the end, doing their signature moves on each other. Williams Oklahoma Stampede, Ace Crusher, Williams and Ace doing the double impact or sky high lariat as it's called here. Tao using the choke slam, Kawada using the Enzujiri, before Tao pinned Ace after 2 Nadawas, choke slams. 3½ stars. January 26, All Japan. 1. Misawa pinned Tamon Honda with a forearm shot in 11:26. Match was so-so until Honda dropped Misawa on his head and gave him a knee drop off the apron. It picked up with Honda kicking out of a frog splash and a tiger driver. 2 stars. 2. Kobashi and Akiyama and the Eagle, Jackie Fulton, beat Stan Hansen and Takao Mori and Duncombe Jr. in 16:11 when Kobashi pinned Duncombe after a clothesline. Match was okay, but the finish was bad from a timing standpoint. It came out of nowhere and the fans weren't ready for the finish and kind of groaned it. 1¾ stars. Puerto Rico. Most of the focus on top is on the centuries-old feud between Carlos Colon and Abdullah the Butcher, who had matches for the Universal title set on January 26 in Caguas and February 2 in Hormigueros. Texas Hangman and Jim Steele are both back from tour of Big Japan and All Japan respectively under other names. Hangman are Gray Skull and I believe Juice. Ron and Chicky Star are now on the road to being babyfaces since they are also feuding with Sean Morley, Huracan Castillo Jr., and Rico Suave. However, female wrestler La Tigresa, who teased she was going to help Invader from a 2x4 attack by Morley on Invader number 1, then KO'd Invader with the 2x4. Chicky Star asked Invader, his longtime rival, to talk with him because they have common enemies. Hill announcer El Profe was doing an interview with Butcher, who pulled out a knife and began using it on him. Colin tried to make the save, but Butcher used the knife on him and both were left bloody before former wrestler Victor Jovica ran in with a chair to end the angle. EMLL. This promotion's first ever tour of Japan opened on February 2 before a sellout 2,100 at Korakuen Hall. The crowd reactions to the show were said to have been great as well, with the tour mainly being built around the Negro Casas vs. El Hijo del Santo feud, which climaxes with a singles match on the final night of the tour, which is February 6 at the Komazawa Olympic Park Gym in Tokyo. It's Santo's first tour of Japan working as a heel, as on opening night he teamed with Bestia Salvaje to beat Casas and Super Astro when Santo used the camel clutch to make Casas submit in 2041. Since it was Japan, they used Japanese rules and the matches were all one fall. Bismarck Jr. and Hector Garza both missed the tour as Garza left for AAA several weeks ago and Lismark Jr. jumped to Promo Azteca just a few days before the tour began, and they were replaced by Shocker and Mascara Magica. Also on the tour were Ultraman Jr., Shinobi, Espectro Jr., Cadaver de Ultratumba Arcangel, Apollo Dantes, Felino Kendo, Promo Aztecas Ninja de Fuego, Rayo de Jalisco Jr., Black Warrior, Pirata Morgan, who also works for Promo Azteca in Mexico, Rey Bucanero, Lizmark, Mr. Niebla, and women wrestlers Lady Apache and Esther Moreno. Promoter Paco Alonso has a meeting scheduled on February 5th with Antonio Inoki to talk about them doing a combined major show probably at Arena Mexico in May or June, and Alonso said that EMLL plans a second Japanese tour in September. The major show of the week in Mexico was January 31st at Arena Coliseo with Emilio Charles Jr. pinning Miguel Perez in a singles match that was said to have been very disappointing. After losing, Perez said he had a surprise for Charles. In the semifinal, the Silver King heel turn continued as he teamed with Dandy and La Fiera to face Dr. Wagner Jr. and Scorpio Jr. and El Satanico. Silver King never tagged in his partners, and in the third fall, with Fiera on the top rope, King shoved him and he crotched himself and was pinned. The two brawled after the match. This match violated two of Box Y Lucha's main complaints about improving Mexican wrestling, not having brothers wrestle each other, Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr., for no reason, and not ruining matches by using the entire match to set up an angle and thus have no wrestling. Promo Azteca. Lizmark Jr. debuted officially on January 31st at the television tapings in Cuautitlán, which drew a sellout 2,500, teaming with Tarzan Boy and Zorro against Villano 3 and Psicosis and Shu El Guerrero. The main event on the show saw Cien Cars pin Conan in a singles match to get their old program back on the boards. Perhaps the biggest news is that starting February 26th, this group has gotten the rights to the arena in Naucalpan, which AAA had been running regularly. Since the arena's local promoter is the father-in-law of Ultimo Dragon, it means that Dragon will work Azteca shows in that building and work occasional dates elsewhere with the promotion, although his main thrust is WCW. Pimpinela Escarlata of the Exoticos trio is set to debut on February 10th. Right now the other two members of the trio are up in the air. Cassandro is said to be leaning toward jumping to this group, while My Flowers is leaning toward staying with AAA. Kato Kung Lee Sr. starts on February 14th, and Luxor of the old Space Cadets in AAA should be in around the same time to form a tag team with Rey Mysterio Jr., who started back in action wearing a heavy knee brace this week. In Border Town shows on February 16th in Juarez, Ilvi Santo and Casas as a team with Lizmark Jr. against Villanos on top plus Salcero vs. Psicosis. February 21st in Tijuana is now scheduled as Conan and La Parca and Santo vs. Dynamitas, Mysterio Jr. vs. Misterioso and Super Astro and Thunderbird and Torero vs. Damien and Halloween and Phobia. Much of that crew is scheduled also to work February 22nd in Los Angeles, but we don't know the location as of yet. Conan and Black Warrior are also scheduled for Northern California shots, not sure where but believe it's San Jose and Stockton, on February 28th and February 1st, AAA. The January 31st show at Juan de la Barrera Gym in Mexico City drew about 4,000 fans, with Diesel and Razor Ramon and Jake Roberts beating Pero Aguayo and Cibernetico and Pierre Roth Jr. and Straight Falls on top. The television of the event came off really well with strong production values to give it more of a major league feel. It was said to be somewhat like a WCW show with a strong undercard and a horrible main event. The size of the crowd had to be something of a disappointment because the match was pushed really hard on television, although the print media buried it since Antonio Pena right now is on the enemies list of most of the reporters in Mexico City. The WWF guys barely sold for the AAA guys, and it was said that everyone looked horrible in the match except Aguayo, who looked decent. There was no fan reaction to Diesel and Ramon, and only a decent reaction to Roberts, who did a major angle with Conan in 1993 but hasn't been in Mexico in 3 years. Ramon in particular looked terrible, nearly killing Pierre Roth trying a razor's edge that was described as being doubly bad because the guy giving it screwed it up and the guy taking it had no clue how to take it. The match was watchable from an angle perspective, and there was decent heat because of USA versus Mexico and because Aguayo worked most of the match getting destroyed. The second fall saw them 3-on-1 and 4-on-1. Chicano Power seconded the WWF team, Aguayo with Cibernetico wanting to help but Pierre Roth Jr. keeping him from doing so. Cibernetico and Pierre Roth Jr. began arguing and Cibernetico walked out on the match in frustration. At that point, Pierre Roth Jr. joined the WWF guys in giving Aguayo a pounding, and Roberts pinned him after a DDT. They continued to beat on him until the Love Machines, Hector Garza and Heavy Metal and Latin Lover, did a run-in, but the WWF guys barely sold for them, which ruined the run-in, and quickly Jerry Estrada, Killer and the new Pentagon. The original nearly died from a drug overdose and will never wrestle again. This new one used to work as Dr. Cerebro and his real name is Joe Mercado, started brawling with them. It wound up with Latin kissing Janet and she momentarily acted as if she liked it. which got Killer really mad. The semi with the Love Machines beat Estrada and Killer, and Pentagon lacked fire, but the undercard matches with Mini Vader and Mini Mankind over Mascarada Sagrada Jr. and Torito and Luxor and Supernova and Las Chivas Rayadas Uno and Dos over Hysteria and Picudo and Maniaco and Avismo Negro via DQ were both really hot. Mascarada debuted a new dive, a moonsault into a double corkscrew plancha, on what may have been AAA's last show and now Calpon on January 29th before a poor crowd of 1,700. Octagon won the Mexican middleweight title from Fuerza Guerrera. Guerrera had won the belt from Elio Del Santo, but I don't know when or where. They are really pushing a one-night tournament called King of Kings, which will take place February 22nd in Madero, and announced on television that Bret Hart would be on the card. A lot of people who know this market and have been the TV continue to believe that Pena is making a major positioning mistake when it comes to using the WWF guys. On Pena's own TV, he pushes the WWF as if it's the big time. It's just like what in many ways ruined several regional promotions that worked with WWF, as the fans just waited for the WWF talent to come in. But it's worse here because with the exception of possibly the border towns, nobody in Mexico has a clue who guys like Bret Hart, Undertaker or Shawn Michaels are. But they're pushed like they're bigger stars than the local heroes. The Friday show in that way made things worse, as even though AAA fans don't know that Diesel and Razor and Jake are WWF prelim material, it was evident that they couldn't work a lick, at least by the standards the fans are used to, but they still sold nothing to the local main eventers, making the local stars look second-rate in the process. The Espectritos have to work twice as hard to get heat wrestling as Mini Vader and Mini Mankind, and now Pena is introducing a Mini Goldust. In Mexico, it was announced that Antonio Pena is now the president of WWF Latino. This is kind of their own one-upmanship between Pena and Conan, since Conan had been having discussions with Eric Bischoff about starting an American television show called WCW Latino, which he'd book and run. Pena really ran down not only Eric Bischoff, but also Kevin and Nancy Sullivan in the local press. He said Bischoff was just a second-rate television announcer who didn't know anything about pro wrestling, but because of his budget is able to buy talent and doesn't use it right. He called Kevin an old man who has no business wrestling and is only on television because he's the booker, and said that Nancy was a no talent who is only in wrestling because she's the wife of the booker. Tinieblas Jr. had back surgery and will be out of action for about 4 months. The new Yeti used to be Chacho Herides. A correction from the past few issues. Abismo Negro used to be Winners, while Maniaco used to be Perro Silva. We've had them mixed up the past 2 issues. All Japan. The major news of the past week was the announcement that on February 1st at Budokan Hall that Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao would defend the tag titles against Gary Albright and Yoshihiro Takayama. Takayama, a tall geeky wrestler from UWFI, had a hot interpromotional match in September against Kawada on the UWFI's Jingu Baseball Stadium show. This is not a precursor to Nobuhiko Okada coming in, as he's going in his direction and All Japan doesn't appear to be interested in him anymore. The main event hasn't been announced, but one would assume that Mitsuharu Misawa would defend the Triple Crown. Most likely opponent would be Steve Williams, although a rematch with Kenta Kobashi is also a possibility. The Misawa Kobashi title change from Osaka aired on television over the weekend, and supposedly it was the best match of Kobashi's career, which is saying a mouthful because that's equivalent if not better than saying the best match of Shawn Michaels or Ric Flair, or Jushin Liger's career. I've only seen the clips from the network news the night of the switch and from maybe 2 minutes of highlights. It appeared it was a match of the year as the moves were hot and the crowd was going crazy at the finish. New tour opens on February 16th at Korakuen Hall with Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Satoru Asako vs. Williams and Johnny Ace and Manukia Mossman, Kawada and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi vs. Kobashi and Isao Inoue and Akira Tao and Giant Kimala 2 and Jun Izumida vs. Albright and Stan Hansen and Takao Mori as the headline matches. It's basically a typical tour with no other major matches other than an all-Asian tag title match on February 22nd in Mito with Amori and Akiyama defending against Izumida and Kimala 2. Recent TV ratings saw January 12th do a 2.7, January 19th did a 3.1 and January 26th did a 3.4. New Japan. The main push was the debut of the NWO as a group on January 29th in Fukushima. In a minor surprise, Marcus Bagwell and Scott Norton beat Kensuke Sasaki and Satoshi Kojima when Bagwell scored the pin on Kojima. The result wasn't as much a surprise as Bagwell getting the pin on Kojima, which shows he's getting a push on this tour. January 30th in Tsuruoka saw Bagwell and Norton beat Keiji Muto and Tadao Yasuda. January 31st in Miyagi before a sellout 4,000, Hiroyoshi Tenzan joined the NWO teaming with Bagwell and Norton to beat Shinya Hashimoto and Takashi Iizuka and Junji Hirata when Norton pinned Hirata. In the February 2nd Korakuen Hall main event, Masahiro Chono returned teaming with Bagwell and Norton to beat Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi and Muto when Norton pinned Nakanishi after a power slam in 12:43. Even though he's got a broken finger, Tatsumi Fujinami has been working several, but not all, of the shows. Fujinami and Kengo Kimura, who are the current IWGP Tag Team Champions, lost a non-title match in Miyagi to Osamu Nishimura and Muto when surprisingly Nishimura made Kimura submit to the Grand Cobra Twist. They've got a title defense on February 8th in Sapporo against Muto and Hirata, and with Fujinami's injury, that may mean a quick title switch. WCW wrestlers Chris Jericho and Scotty Riggs are working prelims on this tour. They aren't doing anything with a Bagwell vs. Riggs program. Ratings thus far this year saw January 5th special do an 11.3 rating, January 11th did a 4.2, Chashu Hashimoto rerun, and January 18th did a 3.7. Other Japan notes. The 24-hour Samurai channel has still only been subscribed to by about 10,000 homes, which is a major flop by this point. They need more like 100,000 to be stable and show life, even though nobody was actually expecting to make a profit for 10 years on the deal. I was told that for those of you interested in the classic matches on tape, make sure and get them early because there is no guarantee how long the station will be around and if those matches will be repeated many times. Rings ran a show on February 2nd in Amsterdam, Holland, drawing a sellout 5,300 which will air soon in Japan. In past Rings shows in Holland, the vast majority of the matches are shoot, while in Japan, only a small percentage are. Both Akira Maeda, who was there and may have done television commentary, and Yoshihisa Yamamoto were kept off the Holland show, which may indicate it was a shoot show completely or mainly, as the matches were very short for the most part and the Japanese lost to people they would beat in a worked situation. Masayuki Naruse caught a knee to the eye against Valentin Alfreum and the doctor immediately stopped their match. Big bodybuilder Yope Castell, who was basically a jobber in Japan, beat Mitsuya Nagai in just 1:05, while Kiyoshi Tamura was the only Japanese fighter to win, beating Andre Minato in 2:17. Tamura may have been protected, or they may have matched him with someone they knew he'd have no trouble with. I saw the Tamura vs. Folk Han Championship match from January 22nd. As I've probably written before, Tamura is possibly the single most underrated worker in the business, in that he's the only one who can do a worked match and make it not only so believable it looks like a shoot, which not one American worker can come close to doing, but also at the same time get super heat for such a performance that he almost reminds me of a shoot-style Shinjiro Otani. He's also got superstar charisma and look, but the downside is he's 185 to 190 pounds, and that may keep him from ever being the number one guy in this promotion, which books so many large foreigners. The spot was basically groomed for Yamamoto, who was scheduled to win the tournament, but in the semi, there was some problem regarding the finish and the two went in without a finish and did a shoot match that surprisingly, at least for Yamamoto, Tamura won, although when Yamamoto was doing a real shoot he dropped from his normal 215 down to 200, so he only had about 10 pounds on Tamura. Han, the master of submissions, and Tsuyoshi Kosaka of this group come close to the same talents as strong style workers. Having said that, Tamura vs. Han this time got super heat and was a great worked pro wrestling match within this style, but it was worked too much like pro wrestling in that there were spots that were clearly out of place, like flying moves, nip-ups, and pro wrestling throws that don't hold water. I don't even want to get into Maurice Smith vs. Akira Maeda. Rings is making noises about trying to do an American pay-per-view show. Pancrase wasn't successful after the first show, and even though Rings, being largely worked, in regard to Pancrase, while there have been worked matches, it predominantly now a shoot, would have more appeal in the US and it's more dramatic, it still wouldn't make it for all the same reasons Pancrase and all the new UFC clones aren't going to. I guess the deal is that Maeda feels that if Funaki can do an American pay-per-view, it should be able to as well. Hey, anyone can do anything they want if they're willing to lose enough money. The idea is to start a Rings America group with Kimo as the top star, and they'd like to get Dan Severn as a regular as well. Severn was offered $10,000 for a match with Maeda, but at the time didn't think the timing was right. New Japan has lost interest in Severn because they believe his Japanese price is more than he's worth, since it's well known he received $30,000 for the match with Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and they were looking at him as a $5,000 per week guy. It was really a deal where Inoki loved him because Inoki's into that type of thing and wanted to make him the top foreigner, but the rest of New Japan saw his shortcomings as a worker and they brought him in but did nothing to push him to get over, nor did Severn's performance in August at Sumo Hall help his cause. Serge Narcissian, who lost a first-round match to Willie Peters on the Mars pay-per-view, debuts on February 22 for Pancrase at Tokyo Bay NK Hall. AJW wrestler Atsuko Mita is recovering from surgery on both knees that took place on January 13 and won't be back until March. Hiromichi Fuyuki is changing his ring name to Koto Fuyuki. Weekly Gong in the February 6 issue ran a 2-page feature on the Observer Awards and also listed the match quality singles and tag team ratings for 1996. USWA. Add longtime general manager Randy Hales and announcer Corey Macklin to the list of those who have leftover problems with new general manager Larry Burton. Macklin left because he wanted a raise since his position with Brown leaving would be upgraded from second banana to regular host, and was turned down by Burton. Burton's ideas of changing the way things have been done and attempts to upgrade, but also his knack for getting under people's skin and not showing them respect they believe they are deserved, has led to the mass exodus. With both announcers, Macklin and Dave Brown, having left, and Lance Russell, who has been asked to return, still on vacation in Florida over the weekend, they called up local sports talk radio host John Rainey and another guy who I believe is named Brad Shapiro to do the show. The two have experience, as Rainey did an angle some time back with Downtown Bruno and even did some matches with him, and also has done radio play-by-play of the Memphis matches. At the beginning of the show, the two said that Dave and Corey weren't available, giving the impression that the two were on vacation. The previous week when Brown wasn't on, his name was never mentioned. This is the second time Hales has quit the promotion in recent months, and this time appears to be for good, as he's said to be frustrated being 35 years old and having spent his life working long weeks and traveling 100,000 miles a year in his car to cities and having nothing to show for it. There is a lot of bitterness among those who left that Jerry Lawler turned his back on several people who had kept the coming going when all the other regionals folded. Reports from the first week were that the two new announcers were so bad that they came off as two guys doing a bad spoof of Russell and Brown. Several newcomers were at the February 1 television show: Jesse James Armstrong from WWF, Billy Travis, a masked man called the Gravedigger, a combination Japanese-German type called Truth Connection, and the _A/WDF wrestler known as Hysteria and Super Crazy respectively, as Super Hysteria. The Travis return was pretty controversial, as he told the truth that he'd been in drug rehab for the past 22 months. However, he then blamed Wolfie D for being the person who turned him onto drugs, which is a different kind of angle for Saturday morning television. Wolfie and Jamie Dundee did a bit where they were pretending Jamie was Billy Travis and Wolfie gave him $50 and then started holding him back, acting as if Jamie, as Travis, was going to use it to buy drugs. Jamie also did an angle with his father that was the exact same angle Mo and Mabel did just a few weeks ago. Jamie said he was sick of the Nation of Domination and said he lied when he said all those bad things about his father not being a good father while he was growing up. As Bill came out to hug his son, Jamie threw him into a garbage can held by Wolfie. Super Hysteria debuted and beat Ice via DQ when Wolfie attacked him. Brian Christopher had a TV match against Tracy Smothers, or Shaquille Ali, as he's known here, ending in a DQ when Elijah Spellbinder interfered. They're going to do a gimmick on next week's TV where they have a mock trial of mic samples for an incident taped in Louisville, and Commissioner Elliot Pollock said that the fans would be the judges on whether he's innocent or guilty. King Reginald introduced a queen trying to get the so-called black man/white woman heat. I don't know about Memphis, but that angle hasn't worked anywhere else. It's been tried and it's been attempted to death. February 6 in Memphis is Bobby Bolton vs. Super Hysteria, Samples vs. Brickhouse Brown, King Reginald vs. Jesse James Armstrong, Christopher defending the USWA belt against Elijah, Wolfie and Jamie defending the tag titles against Bill Dundee and Travis, and Lawler defending unified title against Gravedigger. ECW. It was a big week with packed houses both nights, drawing approximately 1,400 on February 1st at the ECW Arena and 1,280 paying $28,000 on January 31st in Lake Grove, New York, and something like $8 per head in merchandise sales to boot. The ECW Arena show started with Paul Heyman doing a lengthy interview with all the heels on the stage and the faces in the ring, basically thanking the wrestlers and Todd Gordon one by one for their efforts in building the company, and thanking the fans and announcing the April 13th pay-per-view date, which will be entitled Barely Legal. He made reference to WCW scheduling a Nitro taping at the Spectrum on April 14th and said WCW will have to put on a hell of a show to top what they're going to put on. Because of all the heat, not only with the pay-per-view upcoming but also because of the potential of being lumped in with UFC on the New York State Athletic Commission hit list and not wanting to have any problems at the wrong time, the shows have been toned down when it comes to blood and brawling outside the ring. In New York, There was no blood or brawling outside the guardrails, and Heyman made it up by running more angles than usual, one in nearly every match. In Philadelphia, they only went outside the rails in the last 2 matches and had less blood than usual, limiting it mainly to the Terry Funk vs. Tommy Rich match. I've heard mixed reports on the arena show, some saying it was the equivalent of a thumbs in the middle pay-per-view show and others saying it was really good. Louis Spicolli pinned Mike Awesome in the opener, and after the match Awesome gave ref Jeff Jones a powerbomb. Lance Storm debuted and looked very good, pinning Balls Mahoney. Stevie Richards pinned Ricky Morton, who was managed by Andrea. Richards gave Andrea a BWO t-shirt and she gave Richards back the Diesel Fist in the Air deal. Steve Williams pinned Axel Rotten, who subbed for Gary Albright, who missed the show due to complications from both a broken toe and diabetes. After the match, Williams challenged Raven for the ECW title, and after some mic work, the match took place. Raven won when the BWO came out and offered Williams a t-shirt. He tore it up and Richards superkicked him. Williams popped up from the first one and Richards gave him a second one, which he popped up from as well. After a third one, Williams staggered up and into a DDT by Raven for the pin. Sandman pinned Devon Dudley with a leg drop off the top rope. Joel Gertner announced Devon as the winner and Sandman caned him. Devon attacked Sandman and then Bubba Ray Dudley, Spike Dudley and Sign Guy Dudley came out. However, Bubba and Sign Guy turned heel on Sandman and Spike, with Bubba clocking Spike and Sandman with chair shots. The Gangstas did a run-in for the save, but they ended up being laid out by chair shots as well to set up a Gangstas vs. Dudley's program. Eliminators kept the tag titles, beating Sabu and Rob Van Dam. This was said to have been better than their November match and easily the best match on the card. I'm told once again the high spots were unbelievable, but it still had execution and psychology problems. Van Dam was pinned after total elimination. Taz choked out Van Dam while the Eliminators held Sabu back from helping. Terry Funk pinned Tommy Rich in a very bloody brawl, but it was said to have not been good. Funk really needs a good opponent on the next show, because people were noticing that Funk has had 2 straight bad matches, and the climax of the pay-per-view is expected to be Funk in the ring with all the fans as the father figure of the promotion celebrating a successful pay-per-view show. This was already set up in an interview where Funk talked about winning the title and wanting the fans in the ring with him after he wins to all hold hands and basically tell the world that we did it our way, and he tried to put over that ECW was different and better than all the other wrestling promotions, and he even mentioned Mexican offices, Japanese offices and Ultimate Fighting in his interview. Main event saw Pitbulls and Tommy Dreamer beat Chris Candido and Shane Douglas and Brian Lee when Pitbull number 2 superbombed Pitbull number 1 onto Douglas on a table, but the masked Rick Rude had put him on for the pin. Douglas was helped out of the ring while Pitbull number 1 was stretchered out. During the match, Candido's friend Cloudy from a brief WWF run did a run-in, but Beulah beat him up, but the angle got no reaction. At one point all 3 members of the Triple Threat used neck breakers and Rude got mad and said they don't know how to do it. Rude ended up spanking Francine during the climax as well. Tickets for the pay-per-view go on sale to Club ECW members on February 24th and to the general public on February 3rd, and with limited seating, it'll probably be sold out quickly. ECW is going to try and put together a fan-friendly weekend with luncheons with wrestlers, a press conference and a dinner banquet honoring Funk. Next ECW arena is February 22nd, called CyberSlam 97, with Douglas vs. Pitbull number 1, Gangstas vs. Dudleys, and likely Taz vs. Van Dam plus Funk appearing. January 31st in Lake Grove, New York was a major turnaway crowd. There were 2 injuries on the show almost in succession. Bubba Dudley gave Roadkill a powerbomb and he didn't tuck his neck and wound up with a concussion and had to be rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. Then Van Dam wrestled Mikey Whipwreck, and early in the match, Whipwreck's knee blew out on a leapfrog spot and he's on crutches and will be out of action for about a month. After Sabu beat Devon, Gertner announced Devon as the winner. Sabu set Gertner up to put him through the table, but Taz saved him. Sabu went to put Taz through the table, but Taz moved and Sabu went through the table. Taz and Van Dam were also involved in an angle. Eliminators beat Lee and Candido in a tag title match which saw a Gangstas run-in. Douglas and Pitbull number 2 ended with Candido, Lee, Pitbull number 1 and masked Rude involved. Francine slapped Rude and Rude spanked her again. Sandman and Tommy Dreamer beat Raven and Richards in the main event. Richards and Raven didn't work as a team at all and Sandman ended up pinning Raven, and after the match, Richards gave all 3 super kicks. February 7th in Downingtown, Pennsylvania has a 3-way dance for tag titles with Eliminators, Lee and Candido in Pitbulls, Raven vs. Van Dam for ECW title, Douglas vs. Sandman for TV title, Dreamer vs. Devon and Sabu vs. Bubba. February 8th in Hamburg, Pennsylvania has Raven vs. Sandman for ECW title, Illuminators vs. Sabu and Van Dam for tag titles, Triple Threat vs. Pitbulls and Dreamer. Steve Williams works both weekend shows as well. The six-man match from Michinoku Pro on February 14th in Webster, Massachusetts, February 15th in Revere, Massachusetts, and on the CWA show on February 16th in Chelsea, Massachusetts is Great Sasuke and Gran Hamada and Gran Naniwa vs. Taka Michinoku and Terry Boy, Men's Teo in Japan, and Dick Togo. Newcomer the rookie, who looks really good given how few matches he's had, is Chris Chetty, who has also worked as Chris Vandelay, and is a cousin of Taz and whose older brother was a big high school wrestling star in Long Island. Here and there. Dennis Corralizzo is going to promote an Eddie Gilbert Memorial Brawl on April 12th in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, not coincidentally one day before the ECW pay-per-view show in Philadelphia. They'll be doing a luncheon at noon at the Cherry Hill Holiday Inn, a convention from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. and a show that evening headlined by Dan Severn, Jim Cornette, and Dory Funk. The show will honor not only Gilbert, but also deceased former local wrestler Chief Thunder Mountain and Dick Murdoch. There is a documentary movie on pro wrestling that is going into production shortly, which is going to attempt to be something of a cross between Hoop Dreams and Pumping Iron. The movie is being put together by mainline Hollywood producers that have studied the industry for some time, with Ron Howard as the executive producer. If you saw the movie Hoop Dreams, you'll understand where they are coming from. They're looking to feature 2 or 3 aspiring wrestlers who have worked matches but have not made it to the big time that have a passion for pro wrestling. If anyone is interested, send a resume, a photo, and a videotape talking about your life story and dreams of being a pro wrestler to Wrestling Documentary, 859 Hollywood Way, Suite 509, Burbank, California 91505. They're going to pick based more on personality and passion as opposed to working ability. Several ECW wrestlers including Raven, Chris Condito, and Supernova and WWF's Headbangers worked the MUF show on February 2nd in Baltimore, which saw Stevie Richards win the MUF title from Axl Rotten. Carolina Championship Wrestling drew a strong crowd of 565 on February 1st in Biscoe, North Carolina, using Don Coronado, Pez Whatley, and Jimmy Valiant as headliners. That was the best indie crowd in the Carolinas in a while. Not only is Gary Hart running the weekly Friday night shows at the Dallas Sportatorium as World Class The Next Generation, he is also running a promotion out of San Antonio called Southwest Championship Wrestling, the same name as Joe Blanchard's regional promotion of the early 80s, based in the same city that was on USA Network before WWF. Hart is running at a building called El Torito Sportatorium. One name on his roster will be recognizable to real old-time fans: Apache Bull Ramos, now at age 61. Ramos headlined Madison Square Garden against Bruno Sammartino around 1968 and had a major feud with Mil Mascaras in Los Angeles a few years later before being the top heel of the early 70s in Oregon for Don Owen. The Classic Sports Cable Network is running Golden Age of Wrestling tapes on Saturday and Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. showing mainly 1962 to 63 matches out of Chicago with the likes of Buddy Rogers, Moose Kalak, and Killer Kowalski. The amateur wrestling news publication Wrestling Institute News Magazine in its January 9th issue ran a story on Jack Briscoe. It focused both on Briscoe's high school and college wrestling days but didn't knock his work as a pro and mentioned it more than in passing. Briscoe grew up wanting to be a pro wrestler, watching it on TV and going to live matches, and his hero growing up was Danny Hodge. He had his first pro match while still attending Oklahoma State, shortly after winning the NCAA tournament in 1965 facing Ron Garvin. Briscoe was quoted in the story saying this about Bob Backlund: "Backlund was the strongest wrestler I had ever faced. To look at him, you wouldn't think he was really any stronger than anyone else, but he was unbelievably strong. I really did enjoy going against other pro wrestlers with strong amateur backgrounds. We would really push each other in the ring." That may sound funny to today's fans, but before Backlund gave up lifting heavy weights in 1982, he did some incredible feats of strength in the ring, including a one-arm clean into a back suplex of a steroided-up 310-pound Hulk Hogan. There was a group called Soul City Wrestling running in the Northeast last week that ran a Beat the Whiteys night where black wrestlers faced white heels in all the matches. Logan Ketcher, a high school freshman, placed second in the Utah State High School tournament at 150 pounds. He's the son of former WWF wrestler and area indie promoter Steve Gator Wolf Ketcher. Ian Rotten's version of an Eddie Gilbert Memorial show in Louisville, which is scheduled to feature Doug and Tommy Gilbert and Dory and Terry Funk, has been moved to February 13th. National Championship Wrestling on February 16th in Shillington, Pennsylvania at Governor Mifflin Intermediate School has Bam Bam Bigelow, Papa Shango, Missy Hyatt, Doink the Clown, and Tito Santana. NHB. Here's about where the May 30th pay-per-view show stands going into the February 7th show. The idea is to have 4 heavyweight singles matches and a 4-man under 200-pound tournament. Besides Don Frye against the Dan Severn Mark Coleman winner, they've reached agreement on a 3-show deal for Marco Ruiz. Ruiz is inked for singles matches on the May and July PPVs, and if he wins both, is guaranteed a shot for the championship in September. Semaphore Entertainment Group wants Ken Shamrock as Ruiz's first opponent, although Shamrock has indicated he doesn't want that match. If Shamrock turns it down, the Severn Coleman loser may be booked against Ruiz, although that depends on how they physically come out of the fight, and in the case of Severn should he lose, it's questionable if he'll take a match with Ruiz. If Coleman loses and comes out unscathed, he probably would take the match. They are working on Tank Abbott versus Chemo. Abbott has agreed to terms for the match while Chemo hasn't, although his father and manager Dennis Apoldo is dickering with Semaphore Entertainment Group on the terms. The winner of the February 7th heavyweight tournament will probably be in the other singles match against a Dave Beneteau-level fighter. All we know at press time about the January 30th show in Rio de Janeiro is that the Pedro Otavio, who's the Brazilian who beat Koji Kiao in Japan last year in a shoot and then lost a big worked match with Keiji Muto at the Yokohama Arena, won the tournament. Kevin Randleman didn't participate because he ended up breaking his hand in November, although he didn't realize it until going to the doctors a few weeks ago. Mark Kerr had an operation because his hand got infected after being cut open in the Sao Paulo tournament on January 19th, so hands continue to be the biggest casualty. Brian Johnson was scheduled to face Pedro in the finals on January 30th, but he didn't come out for the match because he broke his hand winning his semi-final. The Fuji Network in Japan wants to promote a big dome show. They're looking to find a combat sport they can ride and call their own since K1 kickboxing has turned into such a box office and television rating success. The idea is to have Rickson Gracie versus Nobuhiko Takada in the main event. Gracie was offered $1 million for a worked match with Takada and turned it down. They then made a second offer where they would have 3 10-minute rounds and where the first round would be a work but from the second round on it would be a shoot, but Gracie turned that down as well as made it clear unless the match was 100% shoot he wouldn't do it. This may actually take place since Takada wants to retire anyway and he'll get a huge payday for the shoot. Even though in his prime he was the best submission guy in the old UWF dojo in the late 80s, and when it comes to form and power is awesome with kicks, although kicks are totally overrated in a shoot because a good takedown guy loves guys to try and kick them. Anyway, Takada has never done an NHB match and Gracie has tons of experience and should win handily, although Yoshihisa Yamamoto of Rings lasted more than 20 minutes with Gracie in 1995 in a shoot. There's also talk of getting new money together and reopening UWFI, which would give Takada another way to go. Speaking of Japanese pro wrestlers, World Fighting Federation is planning a show for February 14th, and they've delayed dates numerous times already, which is said to be taped for a delayed broadcast on pay-per-view, with no live location given, billing Gokor Chishivian, a transplanted Russian who lives in Los Angeles and claims a 400-0 record in NHB. Yeah, like that's believable, although the guy is something of a legend in that world and was Oleg Toktarov's Samba coach, against another fighter billed as having a 200-0 NHB record and being a world heavyweight Muay Thai champion, a world judo champion and a world shoot fighting champion. The punchline is his name is Akira Maeda. I'd be just about certain any match Maeda would be involved at this point would have to be a work, and that there's been no pub in Japan for a match of this type, and obviously Maeda headlining an American pay-per-view would be huge news in Japan. We do know that several big-name fighters, including Toktarov and Brazilian Carlos Barreto, have been contacted to do the show, and the word is that the main event will be worked but all the undercard matches will be real. Representative Manette Doderer of Iowa City has introduced a bill to ban both ultimate fighting and shoot fighting in Iowa, where regulated shoot fighting events happen fairly frequently, promoted by Monty Cox, including February 15th in Davenport and February 22nd in Council Bluffs. Cox is likely to be the local promoter for the EFC on February 28th as well. The bill is said to not have much of a shot at passing. WCW. Matches we know of thus far for February 23rd at the Cow Palace in San Francisco are Hogan vs. Piper for the title, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash vs. The Giant and Lex Luger for the tag titles, Kevin Sullivan vs. Chris Benoit with woman handcuffed by Jacqueline, Miss Texas, Dean Malenko vs. Six for the Cruiserweight title, Jeff Jarrett vs. Steve McMichael, and if Jarrett wins, he becomes part of the Four Horsemen, and a Mexican-style trios match with Conan and Psicosis and Juventud Guerrero vs. La Parca and Super Colo and Ray Mendoza Jr., Villano 4 in Mexico. The advance for the show topped $100,000 by the early part of last week. Some notes from the February 3rd Nitro in Memphis. Hogan came out at the beginning to challenge Piper to a title match later in the show as a ratings ploy. Ultimo Dragon pinned Mendoza Jr., real name Thomas Diaz Mendoza, son of Rey Mendoza, generally considered the premier light heavyweight wrestler in the history of Mexican wrestling, in 312 of a decent opener. Even though he was called Mendoza Jr., the announcers made no reference to who Rey Mendoza was. Then again, when they used Vic Steamboat, they made no reference to the last name either. Anyway, little was decent after that point. La Parka jobbed for Ice Train in a real bad match with major style clashes, although Parka did a corkscrew pescado. The Horseman interview ended with them all being friends. The Deborah McMichael/Nancy Sullivan angle has been dropped, which many people aren't exactly thrilled with since it was part of the show that everyone talked about, with Deborah instead badmouthing Jacqueline. This entire Jacqueline deal is going to flop on many levels. She has the look for Memphis wrestling, but not for national television. She can't talk. She has no chemistry with Kevin Sullivan. More importantly, Deborah versus Nancy was really over, and this not only kills an angle that is over, but replaces it with one that has no chance. Steiner's no contest Harlem Heat in the match that killed the show live when Faces of Fear and Public Enemy both did a run-in, ending a very bad match. Then Dean Malenko pinned Mike Enos in a surprisingly boring match. Jacqueline did an interview claiming she was all natural and got her body from working out and not like Deborah McMichael from plastic surgery. Okay. Diamond Dallas Page beat Renegade in a match most notable for Page accidentally blowing a spot and very audibly telling Renegade, "I'm sorry, man." Hall and Nash attacked Luger with a pipe, although as with the Flair angle, they showed the guys holding the pipe and Luger down, but never the attack. Alex Wright pinned Super Colo in a match with a lot of high-flying moves, but they didn't work well and Colo fell off the ropes once. Conan beat Chris Benoit via DQ in a match that started out hot but had a disaster of a finish. Jacqueline came out. Benoit threw Conan over the top for the DQ. Jacqueline was supposed to pull a chair from under the ring, but some WCW idiot had grabbed the chair and was sitting in it, and she, on live TV, started looking for a chair, and what a disaster that turned out to be. To make things worse, the finale with Steve McMichael losing via count out to Jeff Jarrett in just 2:18 ended when Deborah held Steve from getting back in the ring, ending the show on a horrible note with two straight bad finishes coming on the heels of the Heat killing Steiner's finish. The end was a Piper/Hogan angle where Piper had his son with him and turned down the title match saying he was going home to be a good father. Hogan started running him down in front of his son. Hogan, who blew on the opening segment, did a great heel job in this segment. Eventually Piper put his son, Colt, out of the ring, and began brawling with Hogan, accepting the match. Aside from Nitro, weekend numbers saw Saturday night at 2.6 and main event at 1.3, while Pro was again preempted. Add April 12th in Pittsburgh to the WCW schedule. Expect Curt Hennig in May. Dennis Rodman's people told WCW that he had a $500,000 offer to do WrestleMania and be in Goldust's corner, to set up the two as a tag team for SummerSlam. Since he previously worked for WCW, they gave them the opportunity to match the offer. The belief is WCW would have, but Rodman's NBA probation may not allow him to be part of Pro Wrestling Angles. The February 16th Charleston, South Carolina pay-per-view will be the third annual Uncensored debacle. They'll be back with another on April 6th called Spring Stampede from Tupelo, Mississippi, or in other words, they'll be doing 3 PPVs in a 6-week span. Arnold Anderson is out of action with a legit hand injury, which explains why he wasn't at Nitro. Don't have details on the injury other than it's serious, and he's not expected back in the ring that quickly, which is likely to necessitate putting Jarrett in the Horsemen, at least temporarily. Update on Rey Mysterio Jr. He went back to the doctor this past week after resting his knee, and the doctor told him he needs major surgery which would keep him out 4 to 6 months. He's instead back working wearing a heavy knee brace because he's 22 and that's how 22-year-olds think. It's too bad because in the past a wrestler may have had no choice, but he's working for a company that would have paid for the surgery and paid him his contract amount while he was out, unlike prior generations where for economic reasons wrestlers wouldn't have been able to sit out that kind of time. Anyway, the long-term inevitability is now starting. Weekend house show saw January 31st in Kansas City, Kansas draw a sellout $2,838,566. February 1st in West Plains, Missouri drew $3,042 and $40,866, and February 2nd in Cape Girardeau, Missouri drew $2,709 and $35,249. Those figures are amazing since the lineups advertised were horrible, with Luger and Giant versus Faces of Fear, Steve Regal versus Wright, Mysterio Jr. versus Juventud Guerrera, replaced as Renegade versus Terry Taylor, Jarrett vs. Bubba and Six and Vincent vs. High Voltage. Because of problems stemming from Giant, Mysterio Jr., Injured, and Guerrera, visa problems, no showing in West Plains, Missouri. Expect WCW to institute what is pretty much the same policy as WWF and ECW of announcing subs at the beginning of the show and offering refunds. The story on Randy Anderson's cancer is that he had testicular cancer which was removed and he underwent 25 chemo treatments and the doctors forecasted a 98% cure rate. Anderson grew up in Rome, Georgia and was a childhood friend of Arnold Anderson. Randy was state champion in high school wrestling at 119 pounds. He and Arnold Anderson left Georgia together to work for Bill Watts, and he eventually wound up with Jim Crockett and has been with the company ever since. He's also opened a sushi restaurant in Ybor City, Florida with WCW wrestler Joe Gomez. WWF Shotgun Saturday night on February 1st from the Mirage in New York opened with Vader, Paul Bearer and Todd Bittingle looking for Mankind in back alleys and dumpsters. They found him and he was nearly hit by a car chasing after women. Ahmed Johnson beat Vader via DQ and Mankind interfered. Both Mankind and Vader tried chair shots but Johnson moved and in each case they pulled back rather than hit each other. Mankind beat Davey Boy Smith. After Vader interfered and Johnson made the save with the 2x4. Vega beat Jesse James rather quickly. Headbangers no contest, God wins. One of the headbangers backstage threw up on the other and both started licking it. It was said to have been better than the show from the previous week, but still a bad show. That makes them 1 for 5. About 2,800 tickets have been sold for the pay-per-view in Chattanooga as of February 4th. Blackjack Lanza did a video building to the introduction of Barry Windham and Justin Bradshaw as the new Blackjacks tag team. Despite speculation to the contrary, Blackjack Mulligan wasn't there. The videos were shot on a ranch in San Antonio during the Rumble weekend. The spot where Undertaker chokeslammed Sable on Superstars never aired. Mero returned in Toronto and worked the weekend Canadian shows and he and Sable are on promotional tours for WWF, first going to Germany and then South Africa. The two aren't as over as they'd like them to be, so they are getting character makeovers but not being turned heel. Mero's absence last week was something he requested more than a month ago and long before any character changes were started, so one had nothing to do with the other. They aired a Pero Aguayo Jr. vs. Avismo Negro match on Superstars. Match wasn't bad and Jim Ross and Jim Cornette as announcers did a better job with these guys than the WCW crew does after 6 months of having the guys on every week. However, the fans were leaving for the concession stands in droves right in front of the camera. Besides Toronto, the other weekend show saw February 1st in Quebec City, cage draw $3,477 and $63,207. February 2nd afternoon in Montreal drew $6,571 and $132,368, and February 2nd evening in Ottawa, ONT drew $5,135 and $100,937. The Triangle match headlined Montreal, while the other two cities were headlined by Michaels defending against Farouk and Mankind. They did an icy triangle match with Hunter, Austin and Brett, with Austin causing Brett to lose and Hunter scoring the pin. Weekend ratings saw Blast Off at a record 0.8, Livewire at 1.1 and Superstars at 1.6. Bret Hart in the Calgary Sun over the weekend on his role model, Hulk Hogan. WCW has something far worse than bad referees. They have Hulk Hogan. Hogan lost his flair so long ago that it boggles my mind why people would want to tune into that. Watching myself plod along like Hogan, an old, pathetic embarrassment would be too much for me to take. When I walk out, whether it is 3 months from now or 3 years from now, I will hold my head high. Perhaps the strongest reason I didn't go to WCW is because I pictured myself getting lost in the shuffle in a deck of cards filled with Hulk Hogan. One thing about the WWF in contrast to WCW is that we almost always take their previous stars and make them brighter, and they take our stars and make them dimmer. I'm sure Diesel and Razor are quickly finding out what it's like to be on the Hulk Hogan show. They smile when they go to the bank but they cry themselves to sleep. Somehow I don't picture those two guys right now crying themselves to sleep over. This is the end of this conversion. Be sure to comment and subscribe. See you.